Welcome back to the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. In this segment, we will continue our exciting conversation among the panelists today in our program about U.S.-China, U.S.-Taiwan, and cross-strait relations. I'm going to start off the segment with a question to Professor Zhao Chien-Min regarding that there seems to be a sense of urgency on the part of Beijing to move ahead, given the progress already made in the economic domain in cross-strait relations, about political discussions between the two sides. What is your view on that?
Well, my understanding is that, yes, some scholars, let me emphasize this again, some scholars and people at their academia and the think tanks, they do have some sort of a sense of urgency there. They want political talks to be started so that, relations and these are very, at its very initial stage can be further consolidated.
Yes.
But this view is not shared by China's officials, officials from including their paramount leader, Hu Jintao, Secretary General himself, down to director to Taiwan, President Chairman to the Reds Association of Relations across Taiwan Strait. Chen Yuning was here a few days ago, and we met. He said he parroted exactly the same mantra as Secretary General Hu Jintao. What he said was that easier ones first between the two sides, economic ones before political talks, and this, only that would guarantee a stable relations to the future. So we share this opinion. The relations between the two sides have been bad and hostile for too long. For nearly 60 years, the two sides were fighting against each other, and right now we are at the very beginning stage to
repair trust.
Yeah, to build some trust. So it's way too early to enter into the next stage.
But we all remember that President Ma Ying-jeou said that if he's reelected in 2012, that in his second term in office, political negotiations may be possible between the two sides. Bi-khim, what is the opposition's perspective on political talks between Beijing and Taipei?
Well, of course, it would depend on what exactly are involved in these political talks. When the DPP was in government, President Chen spoke of the need to establish a framework for peaceful interaction, for peaceful and stable interaction. But if the political talks are referring to a peace accord within China's terms, especially we are very concerned that recently a large conference took place here in Taipei. A lot of very senior Chinese policy advisors were pushing for the idea of a peace agreement, and they apparently already become quite specific about what should or what could be in this agreement in regards to sovereignty, the acceptance of a one China framework, in dealing with the two parties as region to region, etc. Now, such language certainly does not have a market in Taiwan, and the public opinion in Taiwan would not accept such an idea of a peace accord. But it seems the Chinese scholars and their interpretation of President Ma and his ideas could be a bit misleading. And the Chinese have to understand that any kind of ultimate political solution must be agreed by the people of Taiwan, not simply by the president of Taiwan, no matter how many votes he got the first time he was elected. And so I think the democratic process is something that the DPP has always emphasized. Any change in the status quo, and that is the DPP's position, that any change has to be agreed by the people of Taiwan through a democratic procedure such as a referendum. There has to be greater consensus in Taiwan. I think there's a lot of agreement within Taiwan that we need stable relations with China, we need peaceful relations with China. However, there is no agreement that we want a one China framework. And the Chinese, it would be a gross misjudgment, miscalculation, and a violation of the democratic will of the people of Taiwan for the Chinese to be pushing for a peace accord that is framed on a one China principle.
But we all know that a few months ago, a scholar in Taiwan proposed the fact that there needs to be 3 preconditions before political talks are possible across the strait. And the 3 conditions were, first, ECFA needs to be signed, sometime this year. And second, there needs to be stronger domestic consensus or support behind such talks. And third, the international community needs to be behind, cross-strait political talks as well. And given that, the scholar, qualified his statement by saying that it's only his personal view, not the view of the government. Were there any other preconditions that the DPP will attach to it before political talks are possible, between the two sides?
Well, those points raised by this scholar, Professor Chao, are certainly reasonable expectations, and I think again the DPP emphasizes that any such agreement has to have the approval of the Taiwanese people. Okay. And we have continued to push that not only within Taiwan, but we also hope that American leaders will reiterate that position. Okay. That was stated by President Clinton that any resolution should have the consent of the Taiwanese people. And this would be something that we'd also expect from the Obama administration. It would give the Taiwanese greater confidence as we have to deal with Chinese pressure.
Okay, good. Steve, given the fact that there's been a lot of progress in economic relations between China and Taiwan since May 2008, and it's almost inevitable that talks about political issues will arise sometimes, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but sometime in the foreseeable future. What is your understanding among the policy community in the U.S. regarding possible cross-strait political talks? Will there be a role for the U.S., for example, whether as a facilitator or somebody who actively promotes it, or somebody who just remain the hands-off policy and let the two sides decide what issues they want to address?
Well, I'm not sure what the policy community thinks, to be honest with you.
But just
my own reaction is that there are serious obstacles to any participation by the United States. If we're talking about the past 60 years, I think that what the Marshall Mission after World War II proved is that it's best to stay out of both the Chinese Civil War and the remnants of the Chinese Civil War.
All right.
And it's particularly best to stay out of it when neither side really has complete trust in the United States. I think Taiwan has its suspicions,
so does Beijing.
And that was the reason for President Reagan's reassurances. And I think Beijing also has its suspicions. And then we have President Reagan's reassurances. So this is not anything that I think that the United States would want to actively, other than a relatively passive facilitating role, play any major role. I think in terms of cross-strait relations, I think doing the easy first and the hard afterwards, I think that's beginning to run out of gas. I think the easies were easy, and what the last meeting that Bi-khim Hsiao referred to showed both sides is that the hards are pretty hard. And that the positions on both sides are pretty firm. I was, when I was flying here with Alan, I said that if I were in Beijing, I think I might, at this point, be looking wistfully back to the presidency of President Chen Shui-bian, because their policy was easy.
You know what to expect.
You knew what to expect, and you knew what to do. And there was a certain parallel interest with the United States. Now, with President Ma, it's much more difficult.
And, more multifaceted.
Well, it's more multifaceted. It's going to move much more slowly. It's going to require a great deal of patience, and also a great deal of rethinking of the Chinese position, which they haven't shown much evidence that they're ready to do. So I think what we're hearing out of Beijing, that is serious differences of opinion as to where to go, reflects this more complex situation towards Taiwan, and it's going to require, I think, from the other side, a good deal of patience,
and
a willingness to rethink old formulas and old ideas.
So you don't really think that we have come to the point that there's some sense of urgency in Beijing on political talks?
I think for some people there is a sense of urgency. I think for some people,
but the overwhelming majority, it's not.
Majority doesn't rule in Beijing.
No, only the selected few.
For those who make policy at the moment, it continues to be Hu Jintao's December 31st speech.
2008.
Of 2008. Yeah. But the reality is that there are many in Beijing who do not feel that time is on Beijing's side.
Okay. Alan, I'm going to come back to you afterward. Take a short break regarding the statement, U.S.-China joint statement regarding the possibility of two sides engaging in political, economic, and other areas talks. We're going to take a short break on Taiwan Outlook. We'll be right back.